Welcome back, everyone. This is IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith. I am Jack Smith. Across the table, there's Bob.
Hi guys and girls and everybody in between.
However you like to... Doesn't matter. Everybody.
Everybody.
Everybody is welcome.
Every single one.
Except those of you who go live in pre-production.
They're welcome. We need to give them a safe space to learn.
I guess you're right, yes.
You know me, I love everybody, just not everybody equally.
Okay, I want to see the one sheet on what the split is.
No.
Damn it. Bob, you had a thing you wanted to inform the world of what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, I wanted to have a chat today about releases and planning and coordination and suppliers and all of those things. I have quite a doozy of a story there. And in essence, as I think I've told it before, I tend to work in a corporate enterprise environment. Bigger companies, several suppliers that supply our suppliers, the usual. So you have a lot of people in all the change that are there, a lot of people that are involved.
Dare I say, a tad bigger than a small business.
A tad bigger than a small business indeed. And essentially, the story here happened about 10 years ago. I don't remember exactly how long. I tend to forget my age, or I don't want to remember my age. But around 10 years ago, I was working for a company that did our own application management and development. So we had the architects, the analysts, the developers, the testers.
The full stack.
The full stack, of course, with third parties for the developers and the testers because they're cheaper offshore.
Yep.
The usual stuff.
Okay, so far nothing out of the ordinary that sounds dangerous.
No, indeed. We had a supplier for our infrastructure.
As one does, yes.
As one does, indeed. That infrastructure supplier had its own supplier for the actual hosting and the data centers. And this story goes about our yearly failover and failback tests that needed to be done. So it's accompanied in a regulated industry, and part of that regulation is that the failover system and disaster recovery and business continuity and all those things needed to be tested at least yearly, preferably more, but once a year was the absolute minimum.
So you do a failover to your backup system, your second data center.
Yes.
Something. Okay, so in that
exactly
way, that's a pretty sized environment if you have two data centers and not just two racks in a data center.
No, indeed. It was not the full data center that was ours, but essentially we had quite a lot of space in in our primary data center, and we had a second one, and at the end of the story we had the third one.
Okay, well that's if you do high available SQL server on long distance, you need a witness server. So yes, you need a third data center for that to put in. That is perfectly fine,
exactly,
and acceptable. But I get a feeling we're not going to talk about SQL server high availability here. Well, not just that.
Not just that. No. Here specifically, we had a mix of legacy, and with legacy I mean mainframe and AS400. And then the regular Windows servers and a cloud and SaaS offering. So it was a very diverse application.
That's a big combo.
Yeah, indeed. And it was challenging as a whole. But here specifically, let's go back. The failover. So what was usually done is we pick one weekend for the failover. We run a week business days on the backup system, and then we fail back to the primary system. Usually, there are always little things that go wrong, or the automation that doesn't work as expected. So it's during those weekends, we had quite a bunch of people who needed to be available and monitoring it and be on call, the usual. If you do something in a release weekend, you need to have people available.
Yes.
Just for reference, this company, they worked agile within the deliveries, but the go-to production was on fixed release weekends. So we had 4 official release weekends to go from UAT to production. And usually we had around 3 to 4 weeks before that, we had a release weekend to go from dev to UAT.
So you're very old school waterfall.
Yes, yes.
Okay, sure.
But as I said, highly regulated environment. Some people might guess already based on the technologies that I mentioned. But indeed, it was the old school way of working and it worked rather well, but it's also quite expensive because 8 times a year you need to have a lot of people that are present.
Validation and testing going on, I feel.
Exactly. During UAT to production weekends, we usually did the technical part on Saturday, made sure that all the basic validation was done, and then on Sunday we had most of the business come in to actually validate everything.
That's the thing. I've seen the same schedule myself, deploy and IT acceptance Saturday, business Sunday. Very, very normal.
Yeah, and that's around, on those weekends on Sunday, there were around 200 to 300 people in the building. So expensive things to do. Even just IT was already 60 to 70 people that were there then both days. And the UAT weekend, it was just IT. But still IT for 2 days because we had the Saturday for the technical stuff and then we did, our analysts mainly did the validation to officially open the UAT period on Monday with the business.
Okay. So far, nothing out of the ordinary.
Indeed. Essentially, management, in all of their wisdom, decided, hey, we already have those weekends. Why not do the failover weekend on one of those weekends? Fair enough. One of the things business needs to do is to make sure we don't spend unnecessary money. People are there. Why not have them do 2 tasks at the same time? So far so good. We did it before, nothing really all out of the ordinary there. However, this year they decided to go a little bit further because they said, hey guys, our infrastructure partner, since we already have that weekend, you guys also have various moments in the year where you can do releases. Why not combine them? Because then that means that it's cheaper for us because we only have to pay you once instead of twice. So there was the agreement that the infrastructure partner would have not the development to UAT move, but the UAT to production move on their side. That way there should have been no interference.
So you're doing 2 things at the same time, but you're impacting different fields.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, dangerous, but could work.
Yeah, it's challenging. You have additional risks, but it could work. So far, so good. Everything was planned. We had our roadbooks. We did our due diligence. Let me be very clear. We did our due diligence. We had the roadbook. We had all the tests mapped out. Everything was there.
Yeah.
We start on the Saturday. I think it was Saturday morning or something that we started. We do the UAT promotes. While the UAT promotes are ongoing, our infrastructure partner is doing their production promotes. Once the production promotes have been done and have been validated, we give the green light for the failover. So it fails over from the primary data center to the backup data center.
Yeah.
Failover seems to be going fine. Everything seems to be working until we come to the validation part.
Indeed, because I was going to interrupt you and say, why are we having this episode? Because so far I hear absolutely no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, indeed. So far, I'm a responsible guy. I try to do my due diligence.
And it seems that was indeed the case. Yep,
Yeah.
Well done.
So, validation part. Nothing worked. And when I say nothing, I mean absolutely nothing worked. We couldn't even log in anymore. It was a Citrix environment. We could not log in into our own accounts anymore. Everything broke.
So not even the Citrix login would pop up.
No, nothing. We just couldn't reach anything.
Okay, that's slightly puzzling.
Yeah, and very concerning, especially since by then we were Saturday evening, 11 o'clock or something at night. So you've been there for quite a while. You're tired.
Yeah.
You expect to do one final step and
go home and come back the morning after. But then by 11 p.m., you've been awake for 18 hours and you've been working for 15.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, of course, incident call all parties involved, which for us was us, our incident management of the infrastructure partner, and the technical specialists of the infrastructure partner. Incident call is set up, and the guys from the infrastructure part say, no, everything works for us. We don't see anything wrong here. Those are always the fun calls.
Yeah, because they see all the infrastructure online, everything is green, but yet you cannot reach it.
Yeah. Essentially, luckily, several people on our side do have some infrastructure knowledge. So we didn't have the rights, but the infrastructure part gave us the rights, so we could perform some network traces and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And essentially, we came to the conclusion that we had no network connectivity in the secondary data center.
Okay. But you didn't touch that.
We didn't touch that. We only failed over to the secondary data
Exactly,
center.
yeah.
We did not touch that, and suddenly we don't have any network.
We choose not to have any subscription model nor sponsoring in order to keep our stories accessible for each and everyone. To support us, please check our merchandise at shop.ithorrorstories.eu or buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/ithorrorstories.
Connectivity there. So the infrastructure partner verifies and says, hey, yeah, indeed, you guys no longer have network connectivity. We do, we still do, and for us everything is green, but you guys can't reach it anymore.
Hi, can you please make it so that we can reach it?
Exactly.
Stupid question, I know.
Yeah, but it's really... I lost count how often they came back with a response like that. Yeah, for us it's working.
It's working, yeah. It works on my machine.
Exactly.
Oh, dear.
So essentially, I escalated it to the CIO. Our CIO was already in the call. I asked the CIO to officially escalate it to the CIO of the infrastructure partner. That guy came in the call. They decide, let's involve their hosting provider as well. For us, that was a black box. We talked to the infrastructure partner, and they get paid handsomely to do their thing. So the hosting partner gets put in the call. The situation gets explained. They say, no, we haven't done anything. There should be no issue. Everything's working fine. All of those things. We get the technical guys of the hosting partner involved. About 2 hours of discussion later, somebody of the hosting partner, somebody of the technical guys asked, hey, which data center are you trying to connect to?
Number 2 or number 3?
Yeah, exactly. And we say, yeah, we need to connect to the backup, not the primary. That's always a sound you dread to hear.
That is a significant amount of realization and a very quiet oh shit going on.
Yes, because apparently the hosting partner had been looking the last 2 hours to the primary data center for one very simple reason. In their infinite wisdom, they decided to, since that we were active and since the infrastructure partner was active, that they would also do a disaster recovery test. However, their disaster recovery test was from the backup center to the primary.
Don't you people talk to each other?
I talked to the infrastructure partner.
Yeah.
And we paid the infrastructure partner handsomely to make sure that everything was verified.
To relay the message. Oh.
Exactly. So essentially, they were doing a disaster exercise on a network level.
To the other data center that you came from.
Exactly. So,
ouch.
We had one data center with 0 applications and services running with network. And we had another data center with everything running, throwing errors everywhere because we had no network.
But still, you could claim that both failovers were a success.
Yeah, both failovers were a success, and both failovers discovered a critical flaw in the process. Because, dear listeners, the company that I worked for and their infrastructure partner were of the opinion that a failover can't fail.
I'm sorry, but you need to explain this to me in a sentence.
Yeah. So essentially, their idea was once you start a failover, there's no going back.
One of those.
Yes, one of those. So we had to go to the backup data center. There was no way of aborting the failover and going back to the primary data center and just do it again on another day. So we had to get that backup data center up and running. The infrastructure partner was of the same ID. Their hosting provider also was of the same ID. Just for reference, the infrastructure partner and the hosting provider, to make things worse, were part of the same group. They were just different commercial entities, but they're essentially the same people. They're colleagues sitting right next to each other.
But they have different tax IDs, and so they can invoice each other.
Exactly.
And do schmancy things. Not uncommon, not ideal, but still you now have a very split brain data center. One side has network, one side has all the rest.
Exactly. So essentially, we had a lot of very heated discussions about it. And we came to the conclusion that the only way we would be able to fix and validate everything in time to go open on Monday morning was that the hosting provider would do their failover, would do their failback. And once they completed their failback, we could start with the validate, first with restarting and making sure everything was properly working, and then do the business validation of the failover process in order to give our seal of approval and the seal of approval of business by the time Monday morning rolled around.
So they would continue with their network failover, they would validate without any traffic on it, but they would validate among themselves, then fail back, revalidate, and then you guys would be able to come back.
Yeah. So essentially that took them, and honestly, it took them not as much time as I feared at the time. They were able to do all of that by early Sunday afternoon, 1 or 2 p.m. or something like that.
Okay, so that means that you would be 7-8 hours behind schedule. Oh no, you still had to do your IT validation. So so you were 12 hours behind schedule.
No, actually 14 or 15 hours, because in the schedule usually we had a couple of hours that we could go to sleep.
I think if you're 11 or 14, the clusterfuck is the same.
Yeah, true. So essentially, at around, I think by 2 p.m., we could start our IT validations, which we rushed through. So by 6 p.m., business that was there already from in the morning and then got sent home, or at least most of them were called back. And they could start, I think, around 6 in the evening, they could start their business validations. Of course, as one can imagine, with all those things going around, we always had issues during those failovers.
Of course you do. Yes, something will pop up.
Part of it.
Yeah.
So we had to address those as well. We had issues business-wise because certain applications got confused because they didn't have connectivity to their server, so they wanted to go back to the primary for data. We had a lot of cleanup to do that wasn't immediately discovered during IT validation, because in the IT validation we did not validate any content or any business processes. And for some of them we see data. And the data looks to be okay.
But you don't look any further. If you see numbers, it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So during the business validation, there were quite a few where the data was actually coming from a cache in the other system instead of the right system. It was due to how it was set up and how caching was set up. I don't know the technical details, and they weren't my concern at the time.
No, that makes sense.
But essentially, I think it was 6:30 Monday morning when the final validations were done, and we could give the seal of approval for the offices to go open at 7:30.
Yeah, well, because start of business is usually 8, but it was 7:30.
Yeah, start of business was 8 for the customers, but our
internally
it was 7:30 because some things needed to be prepared. That's essentially the story. As said, it was a clusterfuck all around. Yeah. And it was a very annoying clusterfuck.
I have some additional questions to you might not have the answer to, but you said that you had also a mainframe environment.
Yeah.
Did they run any weekend batches? Or was that just all postponed? Because I know that weekends are usually pretty busy in mainframe land to do all kind of batches and closures and database whatever's.
Actually, that was our luck that it was part of a regular release weekend. And of the failover, during the failover periods with the weekend batches, we had already optimized our mainframe environment and the timing of the batches.
Yeah.
So essentially, we were no longer really reliant on the weekend batches.
Okay, good.
Most of the things were already ran at night during the regular night. That's also the reason why we didn't start Friday evening. If some might wonder, it was to make sure that all the mainframe batches were done before we started.
Before you start, yeah, okay. So that is, I've seen that as well, that you ensure from the mainframe operators everything has run successfully. You have a consistent set and you can start with all the other things, because if you would have any additional batches that were scheduled during that, I don't want to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Any special batches that only run once a month or
those you can reschedule.
Exactly. Those were already rescheduled, not to interfere with anything.
Yeah,
so
indeed. You will not run those things end of month or end of quarter.
No. Of course not. It's those exercises were always done during the period where there was the least amount of things going on in the system.
So in the end, you ended up with an extremely perfect storm that was on all sides a success.
Yeah.
But still, everything went up in the air for the entire weekend, and not you, basically everybody did a 40-hour shift during the weekend.
Yeah, essentially. Of course, I'm no slave driver. We did have people go to the hotel and,
of course,
grab a couple of hours of sleep.
It is, if you're sitting there with a bunch of testers or engineers that are tired, they're not productive, you have to send them home, maybe get some backups in, or get some other volunteers in. But once you're on the floor for 12 hours, your brain simply doesn't function anymore. And you need to be 5-6 hours offline.
This podcast features Jack Smith and guests. We say thank you to our demo scene friends who helped making this podcast possible. Commander Homer for editing, Danko for music and audio advice, NetPoet for additional voiceovers.
Exactly. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it was an extremely frustrating weekend because essentially on paper we did everything right.
Yeah.
We had the roadbook, everything was communicated, everything was validated. It was just a case of, at the supplier side, left hand didn't really talk to the right hand. And at the same time, there were a lot of discussions afterwards about what went wrong and what could have been improved. And it all started with the assumption that, about the hosting provider's part, that their failover exercise would be a no impact exercise for anybody involved, that it was a purely technical exercise.
Because who needs network?
Yeah, from their perspective, who needs network in the backup data center?
Yeah, true.
As we are only failing over from the backup to the primary data center.
I can imagine that they only got the message they're doing a release weekend, so they don't need the backup one. And the second line, we're also going to fail over, that was either not communicated or missed. Let's just call it that.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody in their own corner did what they needed to do. Most of them communicated properly, and actually all of them communicated properly according to the assumptions that they made. There is actually the crux of the story. It's those assumptions. If you have a chain with multiple people involved, with multiple parties involved, mainly, my 2 cents here is ask your suppliers to verify with their suppliers.
Yeah.
Don't just assume that when I tell my supplier we are going to do this, then make sure you do your due diligence, that the due diligence is properly done. It's something that ever since that particular weekend, I always ask them, okay, who are your suppliers, and can you please, in our roadbook, in our go-no-go decision meeting before the weekend, I need to have a concrete statement from all suppliers in the entire chain that there will be no activities going on that might impact the weekend.
That's very expensive lessons learned. I hate the word lessons learned, but it's very sad that you need to add this explicitly to check your suppliers.
Yeah. And honestly, I no longer work there. And in other jobs, it's very difficult to have people realize how crucial it can be to involve the entire chain. There have been several employers where they just said, no, we won't do that. We just take the risk. Fair enough.
Can you please sign off here and mail that to me?
Yeah,
please?
that's exactly what I did. I say, okay, so if that is your decision, usually the CIO or somebody else, then if they sign off, they sign off.
And here's the risk acceptance. Thank you.
Well, and they're right. 9 out of 10 times, or even 99 out of 100 times, you don't have that issue. But from my perspective, it doesn't take all that much time to get a sign-off of your supplier. It's usually one telephone call. Hey guys, are you doing anything? Not just anything you think might impact us, but just anything in general. And if the answer is yes, okay, what are you doing exactly? You say it's not going to impact us, fine. But I just want to be aware of it. So if something goes wrong, I can involve you immediately instead of wasting half a day.
I have a question, because I would expect that even a network failover test from the backup to the main, that there would be a change on the change board about this, because you're still touching infrastructure.
Yes, it was on their change board.
But not the customers, not your change board.
No, because it got decided at one moment in time, long before I was there, that any change that is deemed non-impactful for customers didn't need to be communicated to those customers. In order to avoid clutter and I understand it, because otherwise we would have 300, 400, 500 changes on there that don't impact us.
Sure, I understand the decision, but I strongly disagree with it.
Yeah, it's especially in something so important. Those exercises, honestly, I can understand why they would not communicate every little change.
Fair enough. They don't need to communicate that they're going to remove a decommissioned switch, or that they're going to upgrade some systems that you don't use. You don't need to know. But if they're touching your backup and then network, and then there is a change, we're doing a failover on the backup network, and it is a low risk. But that is exactly why you have a change board where this thing comes forward. That is the organ, the body where this comes up. Of course, unless you decide that this does not need to be informed, then because this will never go wrong, in famous last words.
Yeah, but essentially it got lost between change boards. As far as I remember it, they did discuss it with our infrastructure partner. But the infrastructure partner never informed us, because the infrastructure partner evaluated the change and said, hey, that will not impact, which was not the right valuation. And again, it's also the size of the organization. I'm pretty sure that the people who were involved with our change board were not the people that were on the other change board. Those were separate divisions. And it's one of the risks of having a large organization with a lot of people involved, is that messages get passed along, but somewhere the entire chain, it doesn't arrive to the persons who need it. It's a recommendation. If you have something extremely critical, validate the entire chain. Even if it's just...
absolutely.
Even if it's just for your own peace of mind, it usually doesn't take a lot of effort. It's usually a few mails, a few calls, and you can sleep tight and you can avoid these type of things. And even so, you can never avoid them completely, because people can make mistakes. People can say, like in this case, there will be stuff going on, but it's
gonna be fine.
Right? It will never impact you. In those type of cases, better safe than sorry. Be a little bit prudent. If they say it won't impact, ask a follow-up question. But what exactly is going on? Most likely, you won't need that information, but having it there available while doing something critical, it's a very useful tool when stuff goes wrong, because it's then much easier to get the right person, have them do a check, see whether it influenced it or not. Otherwise, you will need to wake up very senior people to get the right people in the call.
And get back online 30 minutes before opening.
Exactly. And that was sadly not the only time at that particular
No, this is
employer.
this sounds really like a mentality issue.
Yeah. I have a similar story, maybe for another time, but there we actually cut it closer than an hour. It was literally 5 minutes or so.
You're always welcome for follow-up episodes.
Yeah,
When it gets out, it gets out, but this will be for a next episode.
absolutely.
I do suggest we round off on this one because I think it's clear what to do and what not to do when you're doing failover tests, and don't do them at the same time, and then at least talk about them to others.
Absolutely.
That's the TLDR.
Yeah, talk about them and yeah, do your due diligence for the entire chain.
But
Mainly that.
the question is, what's the most expensive due diligence or not doing due diligence? Because sometimes people tend to cut money on the due diligence, sadly enough.
Yeah, honestly, and I understand it. If you do something 100 times and it goes right 100 times, you are very tempted not to do your due diligence the 101st time, because why would you? The last 100 times you didn't need it.
Exactly.
So it's a waste of effort.
Absolutely. Well, some expensive lessons learned in this episode. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Bob, thank you for sharing the tales of misery and non-communicative suppliers.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
This was IT Horror Stories with Jack Smith and Bob. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Deezer, and wherever you find your podcasts. New episodes at least monthly. We have merchandise, shop.ithorrorstories.eu, and Ko-fi if you want to support us that way. Social media is Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. All links are on our website, ithorrorstories.eu. Thanks for tuning in. Until the next time, and don't forget, you are one of us. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye, peeps. Bye-bye.
The content of this podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only and is meant to humorously explore various tech-related situations. Any resemblance to actual events or real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. We ridicule situations, never individuals or groups. Listener discretion is advised, and we encourage everyone to approach technology with a sense of humor and an open mind.